Hello, everyone. My name is Nick, and I'm in the Spanish Literature PhD program here at Texas Tech, and my specific interests are in border studies, and I've also developed an interest in gender studies within that field of border studies as well. So, one particular book, Under the Feet of Jesus, and a specific character in this book is what I'll be analyzing in my close reading. So this book by Elena Maria Viramontes unveils conditions of migrant workers in the fields of California. In one particular example, the blazing hot grape fields. So a significant image is that of the Sun Mad boxes, and a character named Estrella mentions this in a specific passage. So analyzing the Sun Mad in relation to how characters really feel in terms of their physical state while working underneath the hot sun reveals how inaccurate this image of the Sun Mad is in terms of reflecting agricultural life in certain areas, and how advertising is an example of one large overarching theme that this novel presents, and the way the author wants the reader to recognize the indifference of the state in connection to agribusiness and the plight of these young workers. And so these themes of like physical fatigue, the exhaustion and monotonous process that many of these migrant workers endure, especially how during the close reading, there's a specific moment when Estrella hears a baby crying, and that brings back to her memory some of her first experiences accompanying her mom to the great fields on her back. And so there's also different moments throughout the book where Estrella makes connections to the earth itself when she explains that it's the bones of her ancestors in the petroleum that power the nurse's vehicle. The nurse that told them they needed to take her friend Alejo to the hospital, so pretty much gave them an obvious diagnosis in terms of the solution they needed to pursue in helping Alejo seek the medical treatment he needed. However, she took their money, and that was all the money they had to buy gas. So there's a moment when Estrella acts violently and shatters the nurse's belongings with a crowbar in order to take their money back so that they can drive Alejo, her friend who was poisoned by pesticides, to the hospital. So overall, we can see that this has led Estrella to act violently, but also in the interests of her community. So she denounces the indifference of the state in connection to agribusiness and how these workers don't have the proper medical care that they need. So we can see that there's a theme of Bildungsroman within this, the coming of age genre, and there's a theorist named Costa who talks about feminine Bildungsroman and kind of how women fulfill their role within the space of society, their female role within the space of society, like we see in examples of like Jane Eyre, where she ended up marrying Mr. Rochester and had a happily ever after type of marriage. And we also see that this example of Estrella, on the other hand, kind of contrasts this traditional form of female Bildungsroman because she doesn't occupy the traditional space of society in the way that she needs to take on the mantle of motherhood at such an early age. And also, she demonstrates her coming of age at critical moments when she acts, and this shows her concern and support for her community that transcends the individuality that's in other examples of Bildungsroman. So she values the collectivity of her community. And also in relation to Caruth and what we read about trauma studies, is when Estrella hears the baby crying, this brings back to her mind, like I mentioned earlier, her memories accompanying her mom to the fields. So Caruth talks about trauma and the speaking wound when mentioning Tancred's story and the traumatic experience, not only as the enigma of a human agent's repeated and unknowing acts, but also the enigma of otherness, of a human voice that cries out from the wound, a voice that witnesses a truth that Tancred himself cannot fully know. So Viramontes mentions embodied knowledge in an interview, where the body knows how to act, and this And one obvious example is riding a bike, but in Estrella's case, working long hours under the sun in the monotonous process of harvesting grapes. So Viramontes explains how Estrella has an organic intellect. She hasn't had the opportunity to have an education, but she's very smart. Viramontes also explains her personal experiences of what the horror is like of not being able to have books. So connecting this to The Sun Mad by Esther Hernandez, there's an article by Peacock where she talks about how the Sun Mad engages the viewer while analyzing different areas of this piece. There are themes such as the skeletal face drawing attention to inconsistencies and misinformation of the agriculture industry in promoting their products. There's very specific examples of toxicity using pesticides and the effects this has on the female reproductive system, and it communicates these complex social and environmental concerns to diverse audiences. So kind of my direction that I'd like to take with these studies is maybe possibly a journal article in the journal called Atzlan. It's a journal of Chicano studies that presents original research that's relevant to the Chicano experience, but also what I've been preparing for the Rocky Mountain MLA conference in a Hispanic feminine literature panel as well. So that's the direction I hope to take as I continue to develop this project. And thank you.